Welcome to Mojo Motivation and Mental Health, where we're having conversations that change lives. I'm Mike Orlowski. Before we start, if you're struggling with thoughts of suicide, struggling mentally, depressed, please reach out. Call or text 988, the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. And if it's emergency, call 911. You're not alone, and asking for help is not a weakness. You matter. And if this show helps you, or if it may help someone that you know, please like, subscribe, and share. We want to get the word spread far and wide as quickly as we can, because there are people out there that really need to hear these messages. Today's conversation is about an industry in crisis. Construction ranks second in the nation for suicide rates. Second. My guest, Sonya Bohmann, is the executive director of the Construction Industry Alliance for Suicide Prevention, or CIASP. Last year alone, CIASP reached over 20,000 construction workers through 75 free presentations, free, because Sonya and her team believe cost should never be a barrier to saving lives. We're going to talk about why construction workers are at such high risk, the macho culture, the isolation of moving site to site, the seasonal layoffs, physical pain that leads to opioid abuse, and the veterans who make up a significant portion of the workforce. And we're going to talk about what's working, how an industry known for being tough and stoic is starting to have conversations that save lives. If you listened to any of my other episodes with Ethan Getchell or Colleen Seringer about workplace suicide prevention, this is a continuation of that conversation focused specifically on the construction industry. Sonya, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to have this conversation.
I'm grateful for you and looking forward to it myself. Now it's interesting, and I've heard this before, and it's kind of staggering. Construction is number 2 in suicide rates. Let's start with those numbers and kind of dig into that, because most people are often shocked. They don't think about it, but why is construction so high risk?
So, construction's high risk for a lot of reasons, but I think it's important to sort of paint the picture about the statistics first. If you look at what we measure in construction, which are fatal worker injuries or OSHA's Focus or Fatal 4, there were
Hmm.
about 1,000 deaths by the Focus 4. Conversely, though, there are about 5,000 deaths by suicide. And there's lots of reasons, obviously, that can attribute to that. But this is a tough industry. It's hard on our bodies, so there's lots of chronic pain. There is that macho attitude where we don't want to ask for help a lot. There's
Hmm.
isolation. There is just the demographics. More men than women work in construction, and men tend to die by suicide more often than women. There's financial pressures. There's substance use or misuse that falls into this conversation. There's so many things that make it difficult. There's vast veteran workforce who comes with their own risk factors that we have to take into
Hmm.
account as well.
Absolutely, right. So many things that most of us don't think about, or we take for granted, with the, obviously the winter, you're sometimes working in the cold or the extremes,
Sure.
right? It's very stressful.
Yeah.
It's hard on the body. Heck, anytime I've done a home improvement project, I remember how sore I've been. I cannot imagine doing that every day.
Right. Day in and day out in all extremes. It can be really difficult for sure. And then there's injury that comes with that. And sometimes those injuries have you either self medicate or you're prescribed, sometimes opioids that lead to addiction and substance use as well. Can be tough.
Absolutely. Yeah, I remember getting hurt working in a role once and hurt my back. And it still bothers me to this day. And at the time, and
Sure.
it was rough because you can't work. You're limited, you feel isolated,
Hmm.
it can be depressing. There's a lot of factors that can weigh on a person, and let alone that, they want to get back to work. Yeah, that's
Absolutely.
another important part of the topic. Now, CIASP was formed back in 2018 as a standalone nonprofit to address this crisis. What was the catalyst, and what made the industry finally say, we have to do something about this?
So the conversation really started in 2015. There was a magazine
Hmm.
article published in CFMA's, which is the Construction Financial Management Association's magazine. Their magazine's called Building Profit, and it comes out every other month. And there was a series of articles, but the last one was an article written by Dr. Sally Spencer Thomas and Cal Beyer that said there's a growing problem in this industry, and we need to do something about it. So CFMA started to have
Hmm.
summits around the country to really start addressing the conversation. And then right on the heels of that, the CDC came out with their first report that showed that construction is number 2 for deaths by suicide by occupation. I'm sorry, by industry. And if you add in extraction or the mining industry, it makes it number one. And so it recognized that there really is a problem and that we have to start doing something about it. And then ultimately, it was decided that rather than this be tucked up under another organization, that CIASP should form its own 501(c)(3) so that we could address the conversation. And we've been
Excellent.
501(c)(3) ever
And
since and putting
what
out
type
resources
of
to the industry.
efforts? Okay.
Yep. Sorry.
Yeah, I was
So,
going to say, what kind of resources and projects do you do?
well, we offer all of our resources 100% free because, as you said, we never want cost to be a barrier to the conversation. So we have things like toolbox talks so that anyone in the industry who wants to start the conversation in their company can do that. We have resources for someone who is struggling. We have a free mental health screening tool called Connected Mind. What's great about that is that you come to our website and we don't collect any identifying information, and then you go to Connected Minds website and they don't collect any identifying information. So it's a double layer of anonymity, which we know
Nice.
that construction workers really want that protection. They often are ready to seek help, but are worried about doing so in a place that would allow their employer to know that they were struggling. So it gives them an opportunity to get a baseline as
Right.
to what's happening with them. And then at the end of the screening, you can actually print it and take it to your doctor. And there's a QR code at the bottom that only a doctor can access. And it allows them to speed up the diagnostic process. I think I read a statistic somewhere that it can take up to 10 years to be able to get a accurate diagnosis for mental health. And so this helps sort of bridge that gap as well.
Wow.
There's other resources on our website for a company who's trying to decide if they want to have an EAP or how to get an EAP, which is an employee assistance program. That is an add-on to your health insurance that allows your employer to assist with things like mental health, or sometimes they cover things like financial planning or allowing you to find other additional resources. So EAPs can be great, but they can be expensive. So it really the guide allows you to figure out how to do that and how to go to market with it. We have a safe messaging guide. So there's lots of options there depending on what you need and how you need it. And the way that we've organized those tools is that they are in a prevention or an awareness bucket where how do you start this conversation? An intervention bucket where you may have already started the conversation, but how do you take that next step? What's training look like? And how do you sort of ramp up those tools? And then a post-vention conversation so that if you are coming to the conversation after a loss, you know how to support your teams.
Very important. I like the name Toolbox Talk too. It's catchy. It's creative. We got to get people talking, and that's really what really helps the most. Um, Something about EAP came to mind when you talked about it, because I had this conversation with
Sure.
someone the other day. A lot of folks are afraid to go to the EAP. It's a concern. They're afraid that the employer is going to find out, or that could lead to some problems. What kind of experience, or have you had those conversations with workers, or what does that
Yeah.
lead?
So here's what I'll say. Your employer is paying for the EAP, and they're not just paying it
Hmm.
for it when you use it. They're paying for it because of the number of employees they have. They want you to use it. They want
Good
someone to be
point.
taking advantage of that. And what they really want is an additional layer of support for you, or they wouldn't have bought into an EAP. And they're also 100% confidential. So there is reporting out that comes with an EAP, but it is the number
Hmm.
of usage. It is not how it's being used or who is using it or why they're using it. It's a really great tool that should be taken advantage of. What I think the challenge is that people, A, sometimes are afraid, but B, they don't know how to use it. So if your company has one, ask them to teach you how to use it. And if you are someone who is responsible for the EAP, whether you're in safety or HR or whatever that looks like, test your EAP. Know exactly how it works, and then
Mm,
share with your team what that
yeah,
process looks like and exactly what it covers, because that's how you start to get people using it. And if it covers family, because if it does
that's
message to the
yeah.
family, it's a huge advantage for them.
That's a great idea. I can't tell you how many jobs I've had where the EAP is always in the employee handbook, right? And it's listed there, and that's it. There's no
Right.
test, there's no instructions, there's no walkthrough of the process, and that creates fear, right? And uncertainty.
Sure.
So if you can
Yes.
bridge that gap, eliminate the fear, it makes a difference.
Yeah,
I
absolutely. And
like
if you're
that.
already stressed out, you don't know, and you're then scared on how to use it, it just adds that other layer of this is too complicated. I'm not doing it.
Yeah, exactly. Now, I know you have a personal connection on the suicide loss side of things, and that's part of
Sure.
what drives your work with CIASP.
Yes.
Are you able to share some information around how you feel and how that's connected you to what your purpose is?
Yeah, absolutely. So, how I got here is that I spent over a decade in construction, like construction remodels, refreshes, and facilities maintenance. My connection to
Hmm.
suicide prevention, though, is that I'm a loss survivor. I lost my sister to suicide almost 18 years ago. And so it's always been part of what I've done as a volunteer. And then 3 years ago, I happened to be on LinkedIn and saw an ad for this job. And I thought, wow, that looks like my dream job. It allows me to take the things that I'm passionate about, which is construction and suicide prevention, and put them together and make a career out of it. And I'm really lucky to get to do something that I'm passionate about every day.
And when people lead with purpose, they have such a great impact, and that's great and then very important. So thank you for doing that because it makes a difference.
Absolutely.
Now I know you've reached over 20,000 construction workers through 75 pre-presentations, which massive, and it's great work. What does that look like, and what are the presentations focused on? Is there continued follow up after the presentations, or is it the companies then take it and run with it? How does that work?
So we do it two ways. The presentation where we've reached those specific people is an introduction to suicide prevention and the resources that they have available to them. So while we've done 75 of those presentations, we have some additional sort of pieces to that puzzle as well. We have a podcast where we're reaching out to people, and we've been continuing to get viewership, just like you. You know, it's a process, certainly. So we just had our 1 year anniversary of the pod. So we're excited about that. So that's another way that we're able to sort of continue that conversation. The other is that we have a webinar
Hmm.
series. It's called Constructing Change. And so every other month we have a deeper dive into a conversation that affects construction mental health, whether it is on workplace violence or veterans in our workforce or suicide prevention month or addiction and recovery. It really just depends on the topic, but it's one that we get to go a little bit deeper in. You know, just like a pod, you have 45 minutes to kind of touch on the surface of a lot of conversations, but the webinars are a little bit deeper on one specific conversation. And so those are ways that we're able to continue those conversations. But ultimately, what we would like to do after we leave a company with a presentation or an organization is give them the tools then to build out their own mental health and wellness program. So on our website, we ask them to take the pledge to say, I stand up to suicide prevention. And then we have a needs analysis tool that allows them to walk through what they have in place and what's missing and show them where the gaps are, and then go back to our website and use those categories that I talked about to be able to build out the tools that they need to then have a program that stays with the company after we've started the introduction for them.
Which is critical. That's obviously very important and extremely beneficial. I love that. Now
Yeah.
you emphasize CASP's resources are free, zero cost. Uh,
Mhm.
that's great. I mean, why was that non-negotiable? I mean, obviously, I know the obvious reason. How do you fund it? And then maybe we talk a little bit more about something you enlightened me about today, the 211
Yeah,
resource.
absolutely. So the way that we fund it is through donations. We do not take any government funding currently. So when there are things that are happening in the world that cause other organizations that may be on grants that are government funded to worry about what comes next for them, that's not something that we worry about. We've been very lucky that the industry has been supportive of what we're doing. And we continue to look for that as the basis of our funding so that we can always have those resources available. You mentioned 211. And it is, I think it is the companion, I would say, resource. So if you think about the resources and how they almost make a Venn diagram, you have 911, which is for a critical emergency where someone is,
Hmm.
their life is in danger. Then you have 988. And while you can look at that as someone where their life is in danger, there's a couple of really great things to think about with 988 that I'm not sure enough people know about. One, is 911 will immediately be able to tell exactly where you are, and they will send out a first responder. 988 is a little bit different, and
Hmm.
it was designed that way because we know that if people felt like someone was going to come to their home and immediately um, address their mental health concerns, that that might look like what they believe has been sensationalized in the media. So, excuse me, 980 is a little bit different. 980 does not know exactly where you are. What happens with a 988 call
Hmm.
is that your call will go to the nearest cell tower and then it'll be dropped to a crisis intervention center, hopefully in your area. If that is too full, you'll roll to a regional number and then you'll roll to a national number. But they never know exactly where you are, and in about 98% of the cases, they're able to bring someone down from their crisis point. In another 2%, though, they have to, if they can, with that person's permission, dispatch mobile crisis if it's available, or they will try to get them to a behavioral health center. And on occasion, they will ask if they can dispatch 911 if they believe that someone is in imminent danger. But the great
Hmm.
thing is that in that case, they do everything they can to get someone down from their crisis point. The other thing that I think is really important to know is that you don't have to just be suicidal to contact 988. You can be struggling with substance use. You can be feeling alone or stressed out or overwhelmed. You could be with someone that's in crisis, or you could be worried about someone that's in crisis. And if you're concerned about
Absolutely.
how it works, I recommend that everybody try it out to see what that conversation looks like. You can text, you can call, and you can chat, and it's available in over 250 languages, including American Sign
Mm,
Language.
wow.
The other thing I would say is that 211 then is that companion resource that goes with that. 211 is a social services resource. So, if there is food instability, which we know can add to the stresses from our mental health, if you are feeling like you need resources for substance use, if you are looking for a place to land from whether you need a place to go for mental health resources, all of those are available there. They also have additional social services for if you're struggling with a child who has a learning deficiency or some other things that you might need from a community-based resource. That's your place to go for those things. And all of these things sort of go hand in hand, and that's why they almost make a Venn diagram for supporting the whole person.
Thank you for sharing that because, like I told you, I hadn't heard of
Absolutely.
211 before today.
Yep.
Oh, 97, I think the number is 97% of the construction workforce is male. And obviously, we deal
Mhm.
with it, the macho, tough guy, stoic culture that kind of discourages people from seeking help. I mean, I grew up in the
Yeah, of course.
shake it off and rub some dirt on it era. How do you break through that barrier and get men to talk about mental health in this industry?
Well, I think that the more we have the conversation, the more we equate mental health, physical health, or mental wellness with physical safety, the more we have an opportunity to have this conversation. And the more people start to recognize that those two things are not separate, but they're really one conversation. Normalizing it really, and that we talk about it just like we talk about the focus 4. So we spend a lot of time in construction talking about falls and struck bys and electrocutions and those things. But we have to start
Hmm.
talking about not just being fit for duty, but under the hard hat fit for duty.
Absolutely. And that's probably the least looked at part of our daily lives. And somebody mentioned to me
Yeah,
the other day,
absolutely.
we go to the primary care doctor to see about our physical health, and we go to the dentist to look at our teeth, but we almost never go to a doctor to think about our mind, and that's probably just as it is just as important as everything else. So
Absolutely.
it's really interesting. I hadn't ever thought of it that way. I know many veterans choose construction as a career because of the mission-oriented mindset, but veterans are also at higher risk. An estimated, I
Sure.
think, 22 suicides per day in the veteran population. And you've got them already at a higher risk, entering an industry that's also high risk that compounds it. What do you do, and what are your thoughts on how we continue to address that?
So veterans make up about 6.5% of the construction workforce. And while that seems like a very small number, it represents hundreds of thousands of workers. So it's a real
Hmm.
conversation that we have to be having. And having the opportunity to have a couple of conversations with some of our veterans in the industry, it's really about focusing on making sure they have the ability to access the resources that are specific to veterans. And their mindset is different in how they address and what they're willing to share. So if you think construction workers are guarded,
Of course.
veterans in construction are even more guarded. And so giving them resources
Bet.
that are specific to veterans or making sure they have the ability to access those resources, recognizing that some of them that are now starting as apprentices in construction may have been responsible for leading people's lives in combat situations. Allowing for that grace and recognition that this is a big step, maybe forward or backwards for some of them, that there are things that you have to recognize that come before their position in construction that may affect how they look at a situation. And so just being cautious with that. The thing that I would say about any conversation in and around mental health is actually have the conversation. Check in, ask
Hmm.
how they like to be led, ask how, and this goes to anybody, but specifically with our veterans, it's important just to have real conversations and ask what they need and what support would be helpful for them.
Absolutely. And I would like to go into a few of the risk factors that maybe lead to some of these challenges. One being site to site isolation, which I hadn't thought about, but construction workers in many jobs move from site to site, sometimes state
Yeah,
to
absolutely.
state, sometimes further, which creates isolation from family, coworkers, workplace community. Obviously, long or irregular hours disrupt sleep patterns. How does that increase the risk and feed the risk of suicide?
Sure. So there's something called Joiner's interpersonal theory of suicide, and it really falls into three buckets. One of those is that there's a burdensomeness. One is that I can do this on my own, or I'm forced to be alone in this situation. And then there is that acquired capacity for suicide. And what you're talking about kind of falls into that I have to shoulder this, or I'm forced to do this alone, or that they call it throttled belongingness. And so, really, what you have or what you're faced with there is that there is already that tough stoic mentality. There is the macho ness of construction workers that come with that. But then the fact that they are not with their communities, the places where they really can be themselves and feel the most comfortable. The fact that not only is there that isolation, but there's sometimes cyclical changes in our activity. And so you may or may not be in a position where there's layoffs that happen, or
Hmm.
you're running towards a specific time frame, and so that adds to the pressures, and you sometimes feel like you have to carry those pressures alone. What's interesting about construction, though, is that suicide goes across all sections of our industry. So it's not just our workers that are faced with that isolation feelings, but our leadership as well. Because sometimes when you're struggling to balance all of the things that happen in a company, you don't have peers at that level. And so you don't have someone to share that burden with or to help you carry it. And so those add to those struggles as well.
Absolutely. And from a perception of physical pain, right? These are physically demanding jobs,
They are.
sometimes
Yeah.
backbreaking work, not always the best working conditions. That can lead to other challenges, like opioid risk, right? You get on painkillers all of a sudden, you're
Yes.
used to painkillers, you get addicted to painkillers. Not only does that create a safety risk once you're back on the job, but it's also a suicide risk.
So I think there is definitely a co-occurrence of substance use in the conversation around mental health and suicide prevention, whether it's opioids or alcohol. It very much used to have a culture of those things being very much acceptable. I think the industry is working really hard to change that. There are many companies that are joining forces with recovery friendly workplaces to allow for spaces and places for people to come forward and say, I'm struggling. Cultures are changing in many places. Mocktails are becoming more popular. Not having alcohol as
Hmm.
part of the social event is certainly becoming more popular. And looking at ways to support our workers when they do have an injury so that as they're going through either surgery or they're doing some sort of pain relief, that it is a non-opioid pain relief option. Because what we know about opioids is that the addiction rates are very high. So I think that the statistics are for every 1 day that you are on an opioid, there's a 6% chance you'll still be addicted to that drug a year later. And it increases exponentially. But we also know that you'll continue to chase the pain relief because it never is enough. and that there's increased risk for, as you mentioned, depression and for suicide.
Yeah, it just becomes a vicious cycle, and
It
it's
does,
one we have to
absolutely.
break. Now, I know you've got a lived experience video coming out. Why don't you
We
tell us a little
do.
bit more about what you're working on?
Yeah, absolutely. So we were lucky enough to have a conversation with 4 industry professionals who were able to share their stories with us and allow us to tape those conversations so that we can share them with the industry. It's something that's different than what's already out there. It's in their own words, and it is powerful stories of a mental health struggle, a mental health and alcohol struggle, a mental health and a painkiller struggle, and then one with addiction overall, and how they were able to work through those processes and come out on the other side. And it's really a story of hope, and it's a story of healing, and it's a story of perseverance. And we're really excited to be able to share them because we know that they will be game changing for the industry to be able to share those with their workers and ask people to find themselves in these stories and come and ask for help if they need it.
But yeah, speaking from experience, I can say
Mhm.
sharing my story has reached many people, and you get messages from them saying, I needed to hear that today. I
Yeah,
can relate
absolutely.
to this. Same thing when I talk about burnout. It's like, oh, I didn't really realize it, but I'm kind of burned out too. Sharing stories and experiences is impactful. And I'm glad that you're doing this because you can really make a big difference with that.
We're excited. It
Now,
will be available on our website
yeah,
where you can download the full video, which is 10 minutes, or you can download vignettes of each of their
okay,
stories, which are 1.5 to 2 minutes apiece.
nice.
And then there's
Short, but
companion guides on how to use them.
excellent. It gives people an opportunity to, they may not have the whole time to watch it all at one time, but they can watch them in pieces. It's important that is what's important is that they hear these stories. And will you be doing a blitz of some sort, or how do you reach companies so that they can share this? Maybe some of the companies you've met with, will you be sharing it through them as well? Or
Yeah, absolutely. So we will, leading up to the
excellent.
premiere, which we hope is going to be in early May, we will be messaging it on our socials. We will send it out through our stakeholders. So anyone that takes our pledge becomes a stakeholder. They will have access to it. And then, of course, we will have it available on our website for anyone to be able to access.
Okay, good. And I know you and I've got some common connections in Colin
We
Zaringer and
do.
Ethan Getchell, whom I've interviewed
Yep.
for the podcast, and David Krieger. And we're all out there for the common cause. How does our work complement each other, and how do we continue to spread the word?
That's a great question, and I'm really glad you brought it up. I think that there is so many people starting to have this conversation, which is amazing to me. Like, I cannot be more excited about the fact that every conversation amplifies another conversation. The way that we like to look at it is
Right.
mission over monument. And so, if there is someone else sharing the mission and putting out really great resources and authentic, fact checked information that has integrity behind it, then we are all about sharing those resources, continuing to amplify those voices. The challenge becomes then is when it becomes a monument. Is it bigger than that? Is it something because you want to be first, or you want to be the best, or you want to do it in spite of someone else? And that's not what we focus on. We are very mission forward. Our goal is to be apolitical and to be labor agnostic so that everybody feels like they can come here for a collective goal, which is saving people's lives.
And that's really what matters at the end of the day, is saving lives.
Absolutely.
Now,
Yeah.
if you have a construction worker out there listening right now and they're struggling, maybe they're on an isolated job site, or they're dealing with chronic pain, or maybe they just lost their job due to a layoff. What is the first step? What would you recommend that they do? Where do they start?
I would say reach out for help, right? Even if you don't know that you need help, reach out to someone else to make a connection. But more
Hmm.
importantly, what we know is that it is really hard to ask for help. So I would encourage the people that are still on the job, the ones that aren't struggling, to look out for those that you might be concerned about. The person that you haven't talked to in a little bit, the one that just didn't seem like themselves, ask them if they're okay. Ask them to lunch, have
Yes.
a conversation. If somebody pops into your mind, give them a call, check in,
Hmm.
send a text, because that goes a long way. It's much easier for those of us that aren't struggling to check in on someone who is versus that person putting the burden on the person who's already struggling.
That's really important. And it all starts with a conversation,
Just a
reaching out.
conversation.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I started doing recently is just randomly finding someone in my phone that I haven't talked to in a while, and just sending them a
Love
text and
that.
just saying, "Hey, how are you doing?" You just don't know until you reach out,
You
and
don't. Yep.
it costs us almost nothing in the
Hmm.
grand scheme of time, and we could save a life. It really makes a
You
difference.
could. Yep.
Looking at a construction company owner or site supervisor or foreman that's listening and they want to bring CIASP training to their team, how do they do that? What's the next step? How far out do you typically schedule? What's that process like?
So you can always go onto our website, which is preventconstructionsuicide.com. You can follow us on any of our socials as well. It's usually the CIASP. And it depends on if you want
Hmm.
us to be in person or you want us to be virtual. It's much easier, obviously, to come virtually. We can kind of fit it in around other things. From a travel standpoint, we need usually about a month to make sure that we can get travel secured and have somebody be able to fit it into their schedule to be there in person, but we will do our best to do that. While I am the only paid employee of CIASP, I have an incredible board who, although they all have full time jobs in and around the industry, they really do put this at the top of their priorities list. And so we are able to meet almost any ask of us.
Awesome. That's good. And if a company is looking for help that's say larger in size, I would imagine the Zoom option or the virtual option can be much more beneficial, right? Because there's so many sites spread out, you can
Yeah,
affect more
absolutely.
people more quickly.
Lots of ways for us to reach an audience, whether it is virtually, we can send materials, we can do it in person, we can do multiple in persons, whatever that looks like, however we need to work together to do that.
Amazing, which is great. I mean, I think the flexibility actually makes it easier than say what it
Yeah.
used to be, and that's important. Now,
Hmm.
from an industry perspective, you've been doing this work for years. You've reached
Yeah.
20,000 workers. Is the industry changing? Are you seeing signs that the macho culture is starting to say crack and that people are becoming a little more willing to talk?
Yes. What I would love to say is that in the past 3 years, there is so much hope that's out there. There's so many more people that have joined this conversation. There's so many more people that are sharing their stories. There's so many people that are starting programs within their company that we have to continue to remember that that's happening. I think it's really easy. There was a great article in the New York Times that focused on someone in the industry who died by suicide. And there was follow-up articles in
Hmm.
lots of different publications. But the thread that I think was missing in those conversations is that there is this hope. There are large companies, there are small companies, and everyone in between that's starting these conversations. And that if we can just recognize that and work together towards creating a space that allows for these conversations and reduces the stigma and almost normalizes it, then we're definitely going to create change. And it's happening.
And that's what really matters. And Sonia, thank you. I really appreciate what you do. The work you're doing is saving lives, and it's every single day, not just here and there. It's making an impact. Now, how do
Mhm.
folks reach you and connect with CIASP?
Yeah, absolutely. You can go to our website, which again is preventconstructionsuicide.com. You'll be able to go to the leadership button and you can email me directly there if you have questions or are looking for more information. We do have an opportunity for someone to volunteer. You can request a speaker on our website and you can download any one of our resources there. And of
Oh,
course,
excellent.
follow us on
Great.
socials. We post 5 days a week on all of our socials.
Okay, great. And are your volunteers just local to your area or?
No, our board is all across the country. We do have national reach as well as Canada. We do have a Canadian board member, and our volunteers that sit on any of our subcommittees are also all around the country. That's how we grow our board is that you sit on a subcommittee with us for at least a year. To make sure that you're comfortable with the way that we work and that we are all compatible. And then we look to those subcommittees to be able to invite people to join our board.
I think that was a good question to ask because that opens up the door to many more volunteers than, say, just in the local area. I think that's great.
Absolutely. Yep.
Excellent. Well, I'd like to comment and say, if you're a construction worker, if you work in the trades, or if you lead a construction company, go to the CIASP website. It's important that you take action now. You'll find free training, free resources, everything you need, and there's no cost barrier. Sonya and CISP have made sure of that, which is really amazing. In May, watch for the new lived experience video featuring real workers sharing real experience and showing how you can get involved and really feel the impact. It's important that you understand real life experience and it makes a difference. What I'd ask that you to take away today is if you are struggling and you're in the construction industry or in some other industry and you're listening along, you're not alone. The industry has a suicide crisis. It's not just you, it's not the culture, the isolation, the physical demand, all of it adds up. So make sure you take time to talk to someone, reach out to 988. There's other resources available too as well. Talk to your coworkers. Get involved with the EAP as we talked about earlier. There are resources. 211 is another resource that's available to folks. And if you're a leader in construction, you have the power to change this culture. Bring in CIASP for some training, get your team involved, create safe spaces, and make it okay for people to talk about this. It's really important. So again, if you are
Absolutely.
struggling, please make sure you reach out. Call 988, the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. Call 911 if it's an emergency. You belong in this world. Your skills matter. Your life matters, and you need to be here. My name is Mike Orlowski. This is Mojo Motivation and Mental Health, where we're having conversations that change lives. Sonya, thank you again for being here today.
Thank you for having me. Have a great day, everyone.